Hello everyone, this is Jacob Popio, the producer of The Apex. In this episode, we start a new segment called The Disruptor. Being a disruptor means you're willing to drastically alter or change the structure of something. Our passion is to educate businesses on how to use the power they have right at their fingertips. Join Jan, Justin Woods, and the disruptor himself to learn a couple key things. One is, what is design thinking? 2. How can I use empathy to sell more products or services? 3. Why is it important that my brand is an experience? If you want to support us, there are 3 ways to do so. One is to donate to our cause at www.patreon.com/theapexpodcast. Second, visit our merch line that is proudly partnered with Envision Clothing Company at envisionclothingcompany.com. The final one is completely free. All we ask is if you learn something from this episode or know someone that needs to hear our message, share with them. Please subscribe and hope this pushes you toward your apex.
What is going on, Apex Chasers? So today we are introducing something I'm super excited about because it is a brand new segment for the Apex podcast, and we're bringing in more people into the Apex Communications Network family, right? I know that you've recognized probably one of the gentlemen on my screen right now for a video that we've done in the past. However, having both of these people on the stream at the same time, not in the same room because of the Rona, we are going to talk about how to disrupt industries. Like the amount of knowledge that is about to flow through this segment specifically, and not just because of the 2 people that are here, but there's also another 2 that we're going to be pulling information from to talk about what it means to be a disruptor. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. But first, I'd like to introduce both of the guests that are on here with me today. Down below me over here is Mr. Justin Woods. Justin, welcome to the show.
Morning, Jan.
And then over to my left, is Mr. John Kuntz. John.
Hi, everybody. Good morning.
So one of you has a name that is not your name. So, Mr. Disruptor, hey, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from and why you're here?
Great. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. My name's John, and I've sort of been nicknamed the Disruptor. I guess it's because I've managed to live through 3 decades of technology waves and technology turmoil. I live up here in Northeast Ohio, but I'm a self-prescribed digital nomad. I've worked all over the world. And Jan and I got talking about this notion actually back last year before the pandemic disruption hit, about disruptions we're seeing in the industry, particularly as waves of technology come through and enable things like what we're doing today. I mean, 20 years ago, the 3 of us wouldn't be sitting here live streaming over the internet. We couldn't afford it. The technology wasn't there. The bandwidth wasn't there. So, I mean, this sort of is a great example of us being able to disrupt into an industry that maybe 20 years ago or even 10 years ago was probably relegated to the Viacoms of the world, if you will, right? The big boys. Players like us couldn't get into this world. So we've been talking about this kind of stuff for a while, and I'm really excited to be here to sort of pontificate as needed.
Yeah, no, we're definitely excited to have you, John, as self-proclaimed digital nomad and then the disruptor, but within the Apex circles, he's fondly known as our Yoda. So Justin Woods, my friend, welcome to the show. Why don't you give yourself a little bit of an introduction to the audience so they know who you are?
Okay, Jan, thank you again for having me. Name's Justin Woods, and I work for a company that makes boxes, so it's very exciting. Met Jan through Walsh University. And poor Phil. We should have had Phil on here. Give him something to do in the Rona. It's not busy enough. But the reason I'm here is what I bring to the table is sales experience. I've worked for the company I've been with for a number of years, seen a number of things, and the one thing that I've always had to do is jump into positions of work where I actually was very underprepared for the job and teach myself through a number of different experiences to adapt and learn quickly and bring a different look to things that often has done me well because it turned out in a positive light.
Right. Right. Now, and so before we really dive in, because we do have a couple of questions that we're going to kind of work our way through. Um, what I'm really genuinely curious about, and this is kind of a question for both of you guys. I'm going to read a little bit of a section that John kind of sent me as a little explanation, but I really want to hone in on this idea of design thinking because that's kind of a weird thing if you've never heard that term before. But so this is the paragraph, right? So, as one of the only people in the world to plant design thinking at the center of a billion technical deals, his stories from the field will empower any burgeoning entrepreneur to deepen their design thinking in their practice and any naysayer to give it a second look. So, I guess, John, we can just kind of start with you there. Why should people care about design thinking when it comes to putting it at the center of different deals? And why, if they're a naysayer, should they give it a second look?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something. So let's start with a little bit of a story on how I sort of got here.
Yes,
So
I love
back
stories.
in back in 2015, I was part of a acquisition team. So I was part of a due diligence team that went after that was looking to buy. Our company was looking to buy another company, a smaller startup, and they had a very transformational, very innovative solution, something that had sort of wasn't mainstream within the technology software space. We went out to try to sell it, and we got a lot of interest, a lot of meetings, a lot of second meetings, and then all of a sudden the deals died, and we couldn't figure out why. And what it really came down to was nobody had done it before. There weren't a lot of references. It was new, and people just weren't willing to spend, you know, millions of dollars and a year and a half of a sort of a typical traditional waterfall deployment schedule. So a couple of my colleagues and I sat around and we came up with an idea, and we sort of analyzed the situation, and we divided up the sort of what this software platform did, and we identified the personas that would interact with it. We then sort of went and said we empathized, and we built empathy maps and other we used design thinking tools that started to dissect the whole situation. And we, at the end of the day, we came up with a process where we would work with our clients. We would take them through this sort of design thinking method, identify value props and problem statements that we were trying to solve, and then we would boil it down into a 13-week sprint or an MVP that we could sort of phase in on an agile format, and something that somebody could get in low cost, high value, quick hit. And all of a sudden we realized that we were one of the few organizations, even within our large company, which has 350,000 employees worldwide, that we were applying things that sort of stayed in the back room, stayed in the product management, stayed with the engineering, stayed with the with the UX UI guys. We pulled it forward into the sales process. And all of a sudden, we were really sort of connecting with our clients and putting together deals that really resonated. And we built these roadmaps in design thinking. They call them the cake roadmaps. So it's the idea of we start with a cupcake, we build a birthday cake. Ultimately, we deploy the wedding cake. All of our taste good, quick, but they take some are more expensive, more complex, take more commitment. And so we've been now doing this for about 4 or 5 years, and it's really starting to pay off in a very, we're starting to get, traction throughout our organization, as well as our clients seem to really sort of resonate with the approach.
Mm.
So that's I'll come back to some other things in a second on that, but that's the general idea on how and why we sort of decided to pull this forward. And as based on my research, we're one of the few organizations that sort of take design thinking out of the, like I said, out of the design, out of the product management, out of the UX UI world, and into the sales management world. And it's been pretty effective for us.
Yeah. Now, Justin, I know that me and you have had multiple conversations about just being scrappy salesmen, right? Like going in and you have to make sure that you're using whatever technique that you can to find leads, to find qualified leads. You have to be able to problem solve on the spot, on the fly, on site with the clients. Now, when it comes to design thinking, whether or not it was actually in the design thinking package or something very similar, but not quite exactly what that is, can you think of like specific examples or like advice that you would give a salesman on how to empathize with a client or how to exercise some of these things that John just kind of talked about inside of that design thinking process?
Well, yeah, and John kind of was addressing more of the proposal and close phase of a sale. The other side of it is what you do in the prospecting side of the sale, and that's kind of what you were talking about with leads and being scrappy. And it's something often that gets kind of forgotten or relegated off to people who are at a lower level because it's not very fun. It's drudgery, but the process of doing that teaches you a great deal more about the people you're trying to get in touch with uh, than you get once you're in there. I mean, you learn so much about, is this person someone who actually responds politely to people?
Mm.
All right. I can't tell you how many people I've called and spoken to for years over years, and they have just been so fun to talk to. They never let me in there, but they're a pleasure to talk to. So it's like, okay, that's somebody I want to do business with. And then once I'm in there, I'm going to be far more successful at developing those relationships and bringing people in. And it's the same thing, on the flip side of that coin, the people who, you call for 3 years and you get nothing but voicemail, and then the one time you talk to them, they say, hey, why don't you call me back and leave me a voicemail? It's like, oh, not a problem, Steve. I'll make that happen. And it's what you learn through those interactions. You're like, maybe another personality when I get into this account, and once this guy retires, maybe might be useful. So to John's point, you've always got to think, how do you modify what you do to get inside that person's head? Because through the phone, it's very difficult to build a relationship.
Yeah. I always love the one where they say, just send me a brochure, please. And I'm like, yeah, thanks. Right. I'm not even going to waste a stamp on you.
Exactly. Everybody wants a brochure. And it's figuring out, how do you craft different strategies and really plan things out so that, through that process, you break these people down and you get in the door, and then you can, bring the rest of the team.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a whole lot of things that are shifting right now. Right. I mean, we have these sales tactics and strategies that people have been using for forever, and I know when I first kind of got into this world and my dad was like, oh, you're going to have to sell stuff here, read How to Make Friends and Influence People. Right. That's like Carnegie is just like one of those baselines. I feel like it's handed out to a salesman when they're born. But John, you talked about the industry going through these waves, right, of disruption. And there's something different about this current wave that we're in. Mm-hmm. Why don't you kind of touch on why you believe this wave is different and what the future holds?
Yeah, great. So for us that have gray hair, we've seen this sort of, as I said, a number of waves within the technology space. And that's what we do in technology, right? We take technology, we make it bigger, better, faster, cheaper. And if you look at the history, really from probably the 70s, and I won't bore you with the history lesson, but we've gone through a series of waves, whether it be the introduction of the personal computer or client server or e-business and cloud computing. And we're in a wave now that
I think his motion sensor lights just went off. Just stand up and wave your arms around, Justin.
So we're in a wave of cloud computing now, which again, like this, what we're doing here makes the accessibility of technology relatively inexpensive and available to we sort of democratize the ability for almost anybody to get their hands on, compute and technologies that would have cost millions of dollars of upfront capital. So we've shifted from a capex world to an opex world. And again, as I mentioned, or I think Jan and I've used this terminology a lot. We're and this is pre-COVID, and you just throw COVID on top of this sort of digital disruption that we're going through right now. Again, throwing COVID on top of that, we sort of got the double whammy. But it's like I like to say, we're in a world where you're either the disruptor or you're being disrupted, right? You're either the taxi cab industry or you're Uber. You're either Airbnb or you're the hotel industry. It doesn't matter whether or not you're a large organization or a small organization. The ability to quickly as I mentioned earlier, to create MVPs, to agile, to deploy solutions and technology quickly, allow you to go into an industry and really in many cases turn it upside down. Like I said, Uber is one of the great examples of just taking and it's not so much because their technology is better. They met a need, right? There was an empathy to people like me that traveled. I didn't like to carry cash. I didn't want to figure out if I needed to tip somebody. I didn't want to sit out on a corner and try to find, wave a cab down, right? I just wanted somebody to come get me, take me to the airport so I could go home, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm seeing. And so it's sort of the perfect storm of access to high-powered technologies and networks and bandwidth at a OpEx price allows entrepreneurs like you guys and others that I mentor to get into a business, create applications, experiences, and we'll talk a little bit about the experience disruptor in a minute. But create experiences that then can really, literally upset. It's the David and Goliath syndrome in all of our respects.
Yeah, I know that one thing that I've heard a lot of lately is that there's, and I don't know how true I really hold this, but I was talking to somebody the other day that basically said that there's going to be a whole lot of Henry Fords after this COVID. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And he was like, at that time, right? Everybody was asking for a faster horse. That's like the example, right? Everybody's asking for a faster horse. Henry Ford is like, nah, I think we need a vehicle. Let's try this route, right? Let's look at the solution to the problem that the general public doesn't seem to see. And at COVID, it was really allowed. I don't even know allowed, maybe forced. Forced is a better word. Forced people to sit at home with themselves and kind of think about all of these ideas that they've had running around in their head for however many years. And a lot of them are coming to the surface. So all of these ideas are now coming out into the market, and it's becoming difficult for people to figure out, what is that MVP? How do I get there? How do I start designing this? How do I figure it out? Now, Justin, me and you have had some conversations over the years just of like, how do we get started, right? When we first met, and I will never forget this mastermind with Phil Kim, because he's like the one that kicked me off of the entrepreneurial ledge and was just like, fly, little bird. We were sitting in that office, and Dr. Kim, we were talking about something, and I forget what I think I said, I'm not a business major, right? That was my thing at that point in time, because I was just graduating college, just starting to get into this. I had no idea what I was doing. I still have no idea what I'm doing. But he said, do you have an LLC? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, well, then you're a CEO. Start thinking like one, right? If you had to kind of maybe start putting together a little bit of a package when an entrepreneur first enters that world, and they're first trying to figure out how to sell themselves to other people, what are some things that maybe they should try to hone in on when it comes to, hey, I do have a little bit of authority in this arena. You can trust me.
When someone's starting out new, and as what I told you, it's just got to try. It's go out there, fire some bullets, and figure out where you're going to lose. What do you need to improve on? That's what you really want to learn early, is because nobody is good at this stuff. None of us are good at something the first time we do it. But as you had at the time, everybody tends to doubt themselves. And that doubt keeps them from trying. And because they try, they never get any better. Because they never get any better, they never enjoy it. And if you don't enjoy something, you're not going to do it. And you're probably not going to be any good at it. So, that's the thing we got to tell people is you get out there and try. Once you try, you're going to get a little better. Then once you get a little better, now we can start planning on, all right, what has been successful for you? Let's maximize those particular points and push the ball forward. And start thinking of people, hey, think it out at the beginning. Walk through this rationally. How am I going to make this work? Start playing with numbers. What am I going to do? All right, don't start asking yourself, why do people want this? To John's point, what is the experience? What is the anticipated need that you think you have for the market? And now go out and test that theory. And if your intuition's right, now let's start putting money into this. Let's build this. Let's break this down and bring in people, as we all have done, and start to bring in some people to help us. No one wants to ask for help. I might be good at sales, but I might be pretty terrible at accounting. Or I'm probably not the guy who should let me go out and do some HR. Maybe I want to draw up some bro science legal documents, feel good about it. See, it's knowing when to bring people in to help you, and what you should keep it to yourself as the entrepreneur who really has the vision and the passion.
Yeah.
And figure out, how do we convey that?
I'm super intrigued because when you first started that sentence, right, you started off with figure out where you're going to lose, right? You didn't say figure out where you're going to win as the first step, right? Figure out where you're going to lose. And the first thing that popped into my head is actually the first time I met John. Well, the second time, because the second time that I met John, we had to give a pitch up in Cleveland. And we gave this pitch, and it was for a physical space, right? With a crap ton of overhead, a whole bunch of equipment we'd have to purchase, a building we would have to build out. And essentially that pitch was like, the idea is kind of cool, but this idea actually sucks. Like you should go pursue another idea. And so we drove home, and I remember just crickets because Jake Popio, my co-founder, had been talking all day. I want to give the pitch. I want to give the pitch. I want to give the pitch. Goes up and gives the pitch. Bad reception. And so we're like talking about it on the way home, and we're like, okay, so what do we do now? And it's like, well, I guess we just need to chuck another turd at the wall and see if it sticks. And we run through iteration after iteration after iteration. But what I love about this agile, framework and design thinking, which we actually should probably talk about what agile is, just for people that don't know what that is. So who wants to take that one?
I'm going to let John do it because I was going to ask him to define some of his earlier terms. For the lay people in the audience,
the non-technical.
Was that an MVP or an MVP or?
Sorry, that's my bad.
Is there a most valuable player on the?
MVP stands for minimal viable product, and so in agile is just it really, like I said, again, trying to apply some of these techniques that the people that are building technology and software, I'm trying to pull those forward into sort of the sales side of the business. But agile is nothing more in traditionally the old days, right? 5 years ago, you would have deployed software. Let's say a big company would go out, they'd buy SAP or something like that. I'll use a pick on them. And they would spend 18 or 20 months or maybe 22 years trying to deploy that software. So they put a big project plan in place. They'd hire tons of consultants, and they would, what we call a waterfall approach. They would start deploying stuff over time. And what happens is over time, people's requirements change, right? It might have worked when the environment was fairly static and not changing. But look at, between the time Jan and I talked in December between now, it's only been about 7 months, but the world's totally different. In fact, my whole business had to pivot as a result of going virtual. We could talk about that later. But so agile is nothing more than taking the time to break up that sort of 18-month deployment or development cycle, or I'll call it sales cycle if you're selling large, complex solutions, and putting it into what we call a minimal viable product. So something that is a bite size, something that can be deployed quickly, doesn't require a ton of investment. Particularly in today's world, a lot of organizations don't know what they don't know. In other words, they don't know what they need. And that's actually why design thinking is so critical in my mind. It's because you don't have to try to do the feature function sell. You can do the get under the covers, get in their shoes, as we say, empathize with them, which is really just understanding what they're thinking, what they're saying, what they're doing, how they're feeling, and then taking those sort of those become sort of the pain, right? So people, Justin, you probably know this, people don't buy because you've got a great feature function list of stuff. They buy because there's some problem they either have or trying to avoid. And in some one of the sales techniques, they call it pain. And you either buy because you're in pain or you're trying to avoid pain. It's the only reason why people actually do stuff. Otherwise, status quo typically wins the sales, which is not good for us. But so that's agile. It's just a method of doing things quickly in smaller chunks, allowing you at the end of each sprint, as they call it, which is just a small set of time. You then can sit back, evaluate what you did, make a pivot, capitalize on what's working well, and then fix the things that or stop doing the things that now you've figured out you don't need. So that's sort of agile. It's a software development methodology that I think applies very well, along with some design thinking techniques, into the sales side of the business.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I mean, and we actually use the agile framework for not just our audio, editing and our video and our content creation teams, but also for the business development side. I mean, it's very much set up so that we can quickly kind of pivot back and forth, right? I always heard, whether it's the pain or not in pain, I've always heard that you can only really sell two things: sustenance or convenience. So you're either keeping somebody alive or you're making something easier for them.
Right.
Those are the two things that my dad always said are the only two things that you're ever really going to sell. And then now with the agile framework, and we're coming up with these minimally viable products, and people become over time experienced disruptors, right? So why don't we break that down into two things? And I'm actually curious to reverse this. So I'm going to ask Justin this first, and then I'm going to go to John, because I want to see what his perception of what that kind of phrase means prior to John diving into the explanation. So Justin, if you had to kind of explain in your perception what an experienced disruptor would be, what qualities would they have?
Luckily for you, I did have a minimal amount of time to prepare an answer. So, as I see the term, and in the context of what we're saying, an experienced disruptor is someone who is looking at the experience that another person is having and saying, how can we modify this experience to improve it, to improve engagement, to improve adoption, to make it an easier thing for people. And that takes a different kind of thinking. It requires somebody who can bring fresh eyes to all situations, which is a difficult thing to do. But if a lot of us sit down and think about it, those are the most times we've been most successful, is when you were the person who walked in knowing not a great deal about a situation, but you said that one thing that kind of cleared the logjam for everybody else in the room because they were too stuck in their little box, right? And they weren't going to see that. So that's the role that an experienced disruptor plays on a daily basis. They're always trying to step outside of that box and say, how could these things be done differently? How could we improve this situation for all involved?
Right. I always say it's the people that can.
Hey, I'm gonna need a grade on that response.
I mean, we'll do. I'll go A-.
All right,
I was going to give you an A. I think it's actually you're spot on.
Yeah, well, I'm just like I just need to give Justin that little push, like, hey, you could always be better. No, because he does that.
He gave me a 7. A 7 shouldn't even be on the scale. From 1 to 10, 7's the cop out.
Like me, I never give 10s on those scores. I always give people 9s, no matter how good they are.
Always a 9.
Right. Now
7's like I didn't want to make you feel bad, so I just it's not a 6.
Right. That with but the experience itself. So when somebody is inside of a sales cycle, right? I want, like John, I try to empathize with like the customer at that point. If they have an experienced disruptor coming into their workplace, how might that customer be feeling if the person is executing it well? And then again, if that experienced disruptor is executing their interactions with them poorly, what are some ways that like what are they really feeling, if somebody's trying to help them and they're doing it correctly versus maybe coming at them a little sideways?
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a good way to think of this. I'm going to go back another little story I have on making a presentation in Denver, Colorado on some of the things that we're going through the industry a couple of years ago, right? Sort of when cloud computing was sort of becoming more less for the startups and moving more into the enterprises. And this is a great example where if you were trying to sell something like that and you're trying to sell it to a operations person, somebody that's in charge of keeping the lights on in a data center, running systems, upgrading them, installing them, all of a sudden I made this point that, I said your job is becoming obsolete because if you move all those workloads into a cloud compute on Amazon or Azure or IBM or a Google or somebody, you all of a sudden we don't need all those people that are doing that work for you, and therefore we probably don't need you. And and so to answer your question, in that situation, that experienced disruptor like an AWS or an Azure or one of these cloud computing companies, uh, they're that person is now feeling vulnerable. They're thinking that their job is at risk. They are probably doing things that are trying to, if they're either doing one of two things. They're either trying to build a wall around themselves so that they don't, get eliminated, or they're trying to change their roles and responsibilities. So those are the kind of, again, that empathy. So if you empathize with that person and realize that the technology is disrupting their world, which is potentially putting them out of a job, right? So they're going to feel anxious and nervous and scared, and they're going to be doing things that may not make sense in a world if you know but now you go to a developer, somebody that's trying to develop code, and now all of a sudden they can spin up systems and they can get access to technologies for pennies on the for the they can do it by the minute, by the drink, and all of a sudden they're excited. They are moving quickly. They're doing lots of iterations of code. So again, they're now on a very positive side because they're now this experience has disrupted the experience disruptor has now given them access to stuff they never had before. But on the other side, within the same organization, now there's people that are really scared and they think they're going to lose their job. So as a salesperson, you got to understand those two dynamics because one's going to probably buy stuff differently than certainly the other. So that's sort of why I think this whole experience uh, it's hitting people in different ways, some positive, some negative, and getting back and understanding and empathizing with that particular person that you're dealing with um, is going to really help you understand how to not only how to navigate the sales process or the sales cycle, but also just to come up with solutions that are going to be help them, you know, get out of pain or get them, save their job or stuff like that.
Right. Right. I see Justin unmuted himself. So what do we got, boss?
Oh no, I was just going to comment on what John was saying. And in that process, as you said, you're going to have people who may potentially lose their jobs in that decision, and you've got and your job is the salesperson say, I want to make sure I bring a solution for both of these problems to the table, and to clearly say, if I want to sell the software that's going to put these people out of work, how can I also show my empathy and show my humanity by saying, and here's a plan for these other workers.
Right.
Here's some things that I thought about that you could do to repurpose these people to help the organization so that everybody wins. Now, sometimes the math always doesn't work that way. That's reality of the world. But then that's when, well, what creatively can you do? Can you say, well, maybe with some of these savings, we're able to provide some type of support for these people, which is going to go a long way with them, but also go a long way with the community. Okay, and you as the salesperson have already thought out some of these failures that companies tend to accidentally overlook. And there go my lights again. Man, when I was done talking, it was perfect.
You got to wave your hands around. So, to finish that story up, actually, so after my presentation, I'm, doing the little thing. People are coming up, talking to me at the podium and stuff. And some guy walks up to me and he goes, because I basically said, if you're in this kind of role, be prepared. You're vulnerable, right? And this guy walks up to me and goes, man, I just got laid off from my job. And I went, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And he goes, no, you're spot on. We started moving things out of our, traditional world into this more cloud computing world. And I didn't need the systems programmers and the rack and stack guys that put the computers up and maintain them and all that stuff. And he said, all of a sudden I was running a team, and all of a sudden I cut my team back. And then all of a sudden the manager realized they didn't need a manager, and so he literally guy lost his job at the end of this. But it was like, so it was sort of I felt really bad for the guy, but at the same time he sort of resonated with the fact that this is what's going on in the industry today.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is that if the experienced disruptor comes in, and we're starting off with the experienced disruptor being the salesperson at this point, right? Coming in and implementing and trying to help get this new product started and getting the snowball pushed off the side of the mountain, so to speak. You really have a couple of options as somebody that is about to get disrupted. And that's something that I kind of want to hit right here before we get into our kind of wrap up, section, this final like 20 minutes. If you say that you're really only ever two things, either actively disrupting an industry or actively being disrupted, what are some techniques maybe to figure out if you're getting disrupted or you're about to get your crap rocked super hard and like ultimately get just completely flipped upside down? What are maybe some telltale signs that people could keep an eye out for that they're like, maybe I should start trying to think innovatively, otherwise I'm screwed?
Think about. Yeah, that's a good question.
I had espresso this morning, so I'm like, my brain is just constantly moving right now.
No. Well, I mean, some of it is I would almost flip it backwards and say, don't think it's sort of like, don't, that light at the end of the tunnel is probably the train coming to run you over, right? It's coming one way or the other, particularly in large, and so, like I said, you're either the taxi, if you're sitting around, I mean, the telltale sign is don't be the taxi cab industry, right? Don't try to sort of, put artificial barriers in place to stop this disruption, right? Because it's eventually the market is going to, fail. And then a lot of people, I mean, the taxi cab industry in New York City, the monikers, the medallions went from whatever it was, like $1 million a medallion to $300,000, $400,000 a medallion. People are losing tons of money. But look at the hotel industry, like Marriott's and those guys. They're embracing the disruption, right? They're looking at ways to change their business. Obviously, they've got bigger problems with the COVID stuff, but they're looking at ways to sort of be more like an Airbnb. We do an Airbnb not because the Marriott's or whatever, the Hiltons or whatever the world are they're great organizations. I mean, I spend 100 nights. Used to spend 50 nights a year in hotels, but the convenience of me booking an Airbnb is what I like, right? So if you can start to build that experience, you're going to compete with the Airbnbs of the world coming in. And the Airbnb, if you know that story, it's the reason they call it Airbnb is because the guy dreamed up renting, if you will, air mattresses on his living room floor in New York City or something like that. And so he came up with this idea that he met a need where people needed quick, cheap sort of, places to stay, didn't need a lot of fancy, concierge, rooms or executive suites or whatever. And then he built a technology platform to support it. And so that's sort of what I think, especially entrepreneurs. Hopefully I want to talk a little bit about this, sort of how do you apply some of these things to the entrepreneur and the startup world.
Oh yeah.
Because they're the ones that can have this opportunity now, in my opinion, today to truly go in. I mean, 10 years ago, you couldn't compete with a Marriott or an IBM or the taxi cab industry, you name it, right? But now you can. So that's sort of, I'd say it's coming. Just so take your head out of the sand and look at it straight ahead and prepare, or look at ways how you as an entrepreneur proactively look at the experience that, I like to say in the session we did, Jan, a while back, I talked about the sort of the Mr. Coffee machine that you make a cup of coffee on is not an experience, but going to Starbucks and buying the $5, double chai latte, blah, blah, frappuccino, whatever, is an experience. There's still the cost of making that cup of coffee is probably about the same, but one is, one sells for a couple bucks or 50 cents. The other sells for $3 or $4. And that's because you're buying that experience. And people, I just read an article the other day about we're really turning into an experience economy where people are doing things for the experience. And if I can provide a better experience, I'm going to buy your stuff, even though it may not be as better. It may not be as functional. It may be even more expensive than sort of the other competitors in the market.
Yeah, I really think that, like, as the person that is trying to figure out whether they're being disrupted or if they are actively disrupting, if you feel like you're about to get disrupted, you just need to stand by to get some. You have. So I'm using that as a shameless plug and flawless transition into allowing Justin to actually talk about his shirt a little bit. So his shirt is something from a gentleman named Jocko Willick. Right. And me and Justin follow him pretty faithfully over the course of the last 2 years now.
Probably 2 or 3.
Yeah, he's written multiple books. He's a prior service retired Navy SEAL. And has written books like Extreme Ownership and the Dichotomy of Leadership and stuff. But that phrase specifically, when you said when you're looking at the light at the end of the tunnel, it's probably the train getting ready to hit you. Literally, the first thing that popped in my head was like, check, stand by to get some. Like, if that crap is coming down the pipeline, like, just you got to be ready to go. So, Justin, I know that there's a couple of times I watched you mute and unmute your mic, so I'm sure there was a couple of things that we wanted to hop in on. But to start off, when somebody is in that moment, now fight or flight is now kicked in. They walked around the corner. There's a bear that's about to come disrupt their industry and stuff. How do they potentially just stand by to get some? What are ways that they can try to hunker down or try to start putting into place things that they can pivot?
Well, I would recommend not being mugged by the bear, but when that comes, you need to start to look at what you're doing. John brought up coffee, for instance. So, the real person in that equation is Folgers. How can Folgers kind of own the experience? Because as we move away from Mr. Coffee and over to Starbucks, I'm pretty sure they're not getting their beans from Procter & Gamble or whoever owns Folgers. Is it Smucker's now? I think Smucker's owns them now.
I think Smucker's does now.
But they're not getting their beans. So how do they create an experience? What could they do? Personally, could they sell or market other products with theirs? Say the French press, or other ways to make coffee, a drip thing at home. You go into your local coffee shop and you see all these fancy devices. But maybe I'm that consumer who doesn't like to go in and talk to a bunch of people or be bothered with having to get myself out of bed an extra 15 to 30 minutes earlier so I can wait in that silly line to get that excellent cup of coffee. There's a market there too. And that's the thing you've got to look at it again is, the train's coming. It's going to get here. I eventually need to figure out how to take it head on. But how do I make small pivots along the way so that I can make sure I remain alive and viable to eventually figure out how am I going to deal with this train when it gets here and open up some breathing room. And the real message for business owners and entrepreneurs is once you're complacent and once you're comfortable, you should immediately feel uncomfortable because that's a sign that something's coming. The moment, the moment that I get complacent and I'm not constantly saying, all right, where's this next door going to open? Where's this next problem going to be? Then there's a problem. And that's where I think a lot of businesses find themselves is where we're happy. We're content with what we have, and we take that for granted. Right. And like I said, that should be a signal more than something you're excited about is, oh, I'm content. This means I'm probably getting stale. This means I'm starting that downward curve of this journey. Right. Or maybe about to go up over the hill, but the downside of the hill's there. It's just a matter of time.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of our whole apex principles, right? Like you reach an apex, you have two choices. You either go down or you plateau, reevaluate, and chase the next one. Like you have to figure out what that system is, and you have two options. You either try to maintain, step back, reevaluate, and re-engage, or you just start going immediately off the cliff. I'm going to kind of give a little bit of a personal testimony to the entrepreneurial side and the startup side. And then I think that this is the perfect time to really dive in and get into the nitty gritty of that entrepreneurial startup world. So what you guys we're talking about the train coming down the tunnel and all this other kind of stuff. And I just kind of had this epiphanous thought, I think, of what it was like in the very, very early stages, right, of owning a startup. And right now, we're still very much an early startup. But 2 years ago, we didn't even know what we didn't know, right? And that what happens is that you encounter a whole bunch of different trains along the startup journey. The issue is when you first start, they're really close together. Like you walk onto a train track, you're like, I'm safe. Boom, right? Get punched. And then you're like, okay, maybe I'll try this train track. And you like stumble over to the next one and it hits you again. And then you like kind of walk, you're now like crawling, like praying to God that you don't get hit by another train and then you still get smacked. But then the eventual goal is to be able to see that train 100 miles out, and that's what entrepreneurship and I think being in the startup world really gets you to be good at is being able to take a punch as much as Rocky, right? But then also slowly going from just 2200 vision to 2020 vision to 2020 vision with binoculars, where you can now see, I'm watching these market trends. I'm watching these companies. I know who the influencers are. I know what they're talking about. I'm trying to watch the trends. And now I'm starting to get better at almost predicting when that train is going to be on my set of tracks. And so if I know that it's going to start being on my set of tracks 3 to 5 years from now, I'm going to go up to one of those turn points and pull the lever and alter my path just slightly. So inside of that context, John, what advice or other insights would you have for entrepreneurs and startups, particularly in Northeast Ohio and the Midwest, as it kind of pertains to the way that these disruptive market positions, in order for them to continue remaining competitive and growing their businesses?
Great. Sure. Good question. Just a little background. I've been mentoring startups and entrepreneurs now for a couple of years in Northeast Ohio. And what I've learned through that process is it's more of a and I've sort of comparing that to what I would call the coasts. So sort of the startup community either on the West Coast or the East Coast, a little bit different. But in Ohio, Northeast Ohio, and probably in the Midwest in general, what I've learned or what I've observed is most entrepreneurs have what they think are really good ideas, and they're really smart people, and they are good ideas. But that doesn't necessarily mean somebody's actually going to buy it. And so my advice always is to the entrepreneurs, at least that I've been mentoring, is take your idea. And it goes back to that, most startups fail, unfortunately, but the main reason they fail is because of poor market fit. And it goes back to our whole concept of taking a step back and not just identifying the personas which might be using or buying your product or service, but really empathizing with them and really understanding what they do, what they think, what they feel, what they say, stuff like that, so that your idea can then match their needs, particularly if it's new and innovative. Because if you go ask, I see this mistake all the time. They go ask somebody, go, Jan, what do you need? And they go, I don't know. Or they ask for, world peace and solving hunger and a COVID vaccine all at once. And you either can't deliver it, or if you could, the cost would be so prohibitive, nobody's going to buy it. So my advice to entrepreneurs is take your ideas, which are good, but don't take them for granted that they're just because it's a good idea, somebody's going to buy it. Take that time and analyze your market, and don't just identify the personas within that, the buying personas. There's so much work done on buying personas, and I think people stop there. You need to take it to that next step, and that's where this whole design thinking concepts come into play.
Now, when you say buying persona, what do you mean by developing a persona for somebody?
So persona is the core of the design thinking process, right? So you identify, let's say, like, I'll use technology as an example. I might have a CIO as a persona, or I might have a finance CFO as a persona, or I might have a developer as a persona, right? And so when you try to sell something, you try to figure out what you might have procurement. I'm sure, Justin, in your world, you've got people, different personas that you talk to and you sell to. And people try to identify those. And there's all kinds of stuff from a lot of organizations on identifying these personas. And that's great. And essentially what you do is you dissect the person, a persona, like it's a male, he's college educated, he might have 2 kids, that kind of thing. But that my take is, don't stop there. Just because you've identified what this persona that you might be selling to might look like, walk in their shoes, determine whether or not their needs and their concerns and the things that are disrupting their world are something that you can actually provide. I mean, let's take COVID, for example. Don't go try selling somebody if let's say you're selling education or training, right? That's actually what I'm telling a lot of software companies. Provide training, but you're no longer going to sell it as a classroom face-to-face thing. It's just not going to happen. You're going to have to pivot that training to something you can develop to deliver virtually. And the reason is, and that's a very simple example because it's easy to understand from the COVID perspective why I now have I can't travel. I'm shut down at home. Oh, by the way, I actually have a lot of spare time. I could really use time. One of the things I tell people is, now's the time to get people up to speed and get them to adopt, particularly if you're in the software business, adopt your product, adopt your service by going deep dive into the training world. So that's the idea of a persona. You take the persona, you begin to apply these multiple design thinking techniques, which we can talk about on a different show. But that's how you then basically build something, or you as an entrepreneur, as a startup, you build something that somebody actually wants to buy. Because there's so many examples of people coming up with great ideas, but nobody wants it. Nobody needs it, or they don't know they need it, so they don't buy it.
Yeah. I always think too of things like, you guys remember silly bands? Those things that were like rubber bands that have like little shapes of animals and stuff on them that were huge for a couple of years. I always think about like people that come up with stuff that people absolutely do not need and still sell a crap ton of it.
Right.
And there's a bunch of those. Like Furbies, or like a lot of those toys that were just like, children's toys always pop into my head too, because it's not something that we need, but it's not something, but it's something that people buy a lot of. What do you got, Justin?
Pet rocks.
Pet rocks. Yes.
I was gonna go Baby Shark.
Oh my god.
Oh, that Baby Sharks. I mean, the marketing genius behind the most earworm of a song that any child can just tell Alexa, Baby Shark. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. What do you think about the disruptive market, especially here in Northeast Ohio, Justin? Like, what with everything that's going on, and I mean, you've been involved with my world, with the entrepreneurial and startup world for a while, and I know that you've been involved with others. But What are you seeing as far as the market conditions in Northeast Ohio here?
It's an unpredictable world out there. So typically when I'm asked, I don't know. None of us know. What we do is it's, day to day, I need to be responding. I need to be paying attention. I need to be reacting to these things. Because, quite frankly, what we would have started doing in March, by the time we got to June, we needed a different plan, and then, whoo, I was trying to move, guys. I really was. So as we go on, it's not getting any better. But the thing is, I'm always thinking about it. We're always thinking about it. While a lot of people aren't, and that's what I try to tell people. You need to sit back. You need to think. Each day, you need to assess the situation and say, all right, what am I going to do different today? See if it gets traction. Continue to do it. All right. And once that goes, as I said, we don't get complacent. What am I going to do tomorrow to get traction? Because there's like monitoring the situation. Things are constantly changing. And I constantly need to be thinking about that type of thing. So that's the easy answer there, and it's kind of John was talking about with the persona review, is people always need to think deeper than that. We're always worried about the customer or the person we're going to sell to, but we need to look out, well, what about their client or, an individual, their family? Outside of their family, you go to the organization or the community, and how do all of these people feel? Or if you're selling to a company, what do their customers want? How do I anticipate a couple links down the chain? Because that's eventually going to be that train coming at that person. Can I get in front of these things? And constantly thinking about that, testing ideas before you need the ideas. So then once the right stars align, you can go to the shelf and deploy, okay, we're going to try this.
Right.
Because we've constantly been thinking about what's our contingency, what's our next plan.
Yeah.
You don't want to be, I guess I look at it, I don't want to be in the environment where I'm being disrupted and not have a plan. Oh, I have plans.
Yeah.
All right. We've gamed these situations out to some degree. And if we haven't gamed this one out, we've probably done a couple that are close enough. Or at least we've got the experience that we've gamed these things out. So when something comes at us, we've got a process that we're going to immediately go into. Where other people are behind just trying to figure out the process to begin to address the issue that's hitting them.
Yeah.
So that's what I think. You need to be prepared, even for things we don't even think we should be prepared for sometimes.
Right. And that's kind of the difficult part, is preparing for things that you don't know that you need to be prepared for. And so, like, the two things that I have always advocated for when it comes to preparedness is, one is a word and one is a concept, right? So the word why is something that you should always have in the back of your mind. If you just constantly ask why somebody does something the way they do, why a process is what it is, why we have to use this piece of technology, why does this person have to, on and on and on. As long as you have that word in your vocabulary, you are drastically decreasing your chances of being disrupted. You're actually increasing your chances of disrupting industries. Correct. Because you're asking why. The second thing is this idea that I call the gas station clerk plan, right? And I came up with this because as an entrepreneur in the startup world, sometimes we believe that the only place that we get to vet ideas is at a pitch contest or at a class or in some type of bottom up market analysis seminar or something along those lines. And I'm like, no. You got the Starbucks barista, you got the gas station clerk, you got the bank teller, you've got your mom, dad, friend, uncle, everybody and anybody that you come in contact with. You can start a conversation and then gauge based off of that person's body language, the way that they're talking, and the nice thing is gas station clerks have no vested interest. And generally they're not like super, super talkative. They kind of want to move on with their day. So if you can keep a gas station clerk involved in a conversation for a short period of time about a pitch, you're probably on a pretty decent track. Right. And then you just keep asking that question over and over and over again. And eventually you can take it up to somebody like Yoda and have an actual analysis done on it. And then you may have an actual plan. Right. But get out of the mindset that you have to be at a pitch contest or you have to be in the tunnel staring at the train by the time that you're ready to start vetting an idea. You can start talking to the operator all the way back at the station before you even start marching down the tracks. So those are my two little plugs there. John, what were you going to say before I kind of went on my little soapbox there?
Yeah, now I got to remember. No, I was going to say on a positive side, back to sort of Northeast Ohio, and I think if COVID has taught us anything, and it's funny because I've been doing this for years. As I said, I'm sort of the self-proclaimed digital nomad, and part of the reason I live here in Northeast Ohio is because it's a great place to live. It was a great place to raise our kids. It's been traditionally a hard place to make to earn a living, but I literally would travel the world to do that. But now with things being so more virtual and people starting to realize that most people can do their jobs anywhere, I think Northeast Ohio is well positioned because our cost of living is low, except for our crappy winters, but we make up for it with our wonderful summers. I mean, I work with a lot of people in Austin, Texas, and I explain to them that it's 75 and there's no humidity and it's 102 and they're dying, or they're trying to avoid a hurricane or something. But I mean, I think Ohio is well positioned from an entrepreneurial standpoint, and I hope some of the big boys wake up. The Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks of the world, because we've got good talent and we should be able to bring that talent up. People can live here for like kings. I mean, you can buy a house in Northeast Ohio that would be cost millions of dollars on the coast. And so, I mean, I think if we play this right, we should be able to not only draw talent, keep talent here in town or in Northeast Ohio, and then build up the startup and entrepreneurial community as a result. That's my sort of my vision and sort of what I've been trying to do as I mentor, do my volunteer mentoring work with a number of entrepreneurs.
I definitely agree. I think that the entrepreneurial and the startup space inside of Northeast Ohio is just absolutely um, polar opposite than what we all anticipated it would happen in March.
Yeah.
When March hit, I mean, you know firsthand, and you as well, Justin. I was self quarantined in an apartment at my alumnus because I was still working full time as an ICU nurse. I'm trying to, do one of my first consulting gigs that was a massive pain in my ass, and then just kind of continued vetting iteration after iteration after iteration. And I watched business like people that I have known in the entrepreneurial startup world drop like flies. I mean, they were like left and right. People were getting out of business and all this other kind of stuff. But then I started noticing there was people starting businesses in the middle of the shitstorm. They're starting something up, and I was like, that is one ballsy person. With all of this stuff going on and the amount of people that have to be telling them that they are absolutely off their chain, trying to do something at this period in time. That's the kind of mentality that's like, hey, everybody else is crapping their pants and crying in the corner. I'm going to go out onto the battlefield and see what's out there and try to figure it out. And I've seen a lot of it over the last 3, 4, 5 months. People are coming out there they're starting to awaken to the fact that not everything has to be as society has deemed it to be. Right? We watched national television stations be on Zoom calls basically at their homes, right? We've had kids pop up on your CEO exec meetings because you're now at the home. You're getting a more empathetic connection with people because you're seeing them in their natural environment. And I've heard from a lot of people, and it's actually probably about 60-40, 60% saying that they feel less connected, but still there's a good percentage that actually say the opposite, that they see a different side of their coworkers because they're now interacting with them while they're in their bedroom eating cereal, trying to get work done because it's a due date the next morning.
No, I think
those types of interactions are irreplaceable.
Yeah, 5 years ago, if your dog started barking on a conference call, you would cringe. You would be like, "Oh my God!" You try to hit the mute button as fast as you could, or if your kids walked into your home office and while you're on a call. But now people are all doing this, and so they actually are now empathizing with, "Oh well, yeah, you have a dog, you have a kid, you have whatever, and so I think we really are starting to see more of a human side, a human centric side of business, which I think on the long, and if people that can figure out how to play off on that and capitalize on that, I think we'll do well.
Yeah.
And I mean, look at us. 3 years ago, we would have probably all been in your studio down in Canton, right, in a room, and that would have been the norm. Now we're all in 3 different locations, doing something that allowed us to. And again, part of that's the technology. That's the disruption of the technology that has allowed folks like you, Jan, to be able to, like you said, compete with with a Viacom, right? We would have never been able to have done something like this 4 or 5 years ago. Would have been too expensive. The bandwidth wasn't there. The technology wasn't accessible. But now you can start to build stuff, and I think this again why what you're doing from your business is very innovative, right? Because you can you're bringing forward good ideas. You are you're starting to play upon and build upon the work that you're doing with your clients, and it's and a lot of it's just starting here on these podcasts.
Yeah, that's the big thing, is it's just kind of all starting with conversations. Justin, I'd like to kind of give you the floor here before we wrap up. Is there anything that's, comments, questions, concerns, it's burning at your heart? You just got to get it out to the audience that we can wrap up with.
I have nothing. I'm going to have to, I learned something today, and I'm going to do better next time. That's what I got out of it. I learned something. I'm going to do better next time.
I love it. All right, guys. So I appreciate your time. It's early in the morning, and taking the time on a Friday. I was talking to Justin about it, and he was like, dude, out of all the times, the one Friday that I decided to take off work, you decide to have something at 6:00 in the morning. He's like, one time I take off work, 6:00. I was like, yeah, it is. But
somebody suggested we do it Friday night, and I said, nah, that ain't gonna work.
Right.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't do that.
I'm still gonna have to do tonight because I still have Jason. Well, I might as well just talk about it right here. So this is one half. I go over here. One half of the Disruptor team. Right. You'd think after almost 100 episodes that I'd have my rights and lefts down as far as the computer screen goes, but apparently that's not a thing. So we've got Justin Woods down below and John Coots right next to me here. And this is kind of going to be a section of the Disruptor that's really focused on how do we use design thinking kind of in that sales world, right? How are we helping entrepreneurs? How are we helping startups? How are we helping with market fit and selling yourself or your product to the world, right? The nice thing about the Disruptor is that we have another half of the team. Okay, the other half of the team is a gentleman named Jason Storch and Shwayz Bahati, who you'll meet on the next episode. And they're more in the data side of the world, right? Jason is an actual data analyst. He's a data scientist that's, Lean Six Sigma certified. He focuses on process improvement, and he really tries to bring all of these different silos together so that you can have an executable product. And then Shwayz got his master's in human factors engineering, I think is what it's called, or human systems engineering. So he actually studied micro interactions with people and how to increase trust between people and AI. So it's super, super intricate. I'm really looking forward to the conversation with them. If you want to stay tuned to these conversations, all you have to do is either subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or you can like or follow the page if you're watching this on Facebook. And we will be putting episodes like this out every single week, starting this, with this episode. So go ahead, make sure that you're hopping on there. You're clicking the like button, you're clicking the follow button, subscribing to the channels, because we are going to be putting out a ton of valuable information through this channel. So one last time, guys, I'd like to thank you for stopping over. And for everybody that's watching this is an Apex Communications production called The Disruptor. I look forward to talking to you next time. Until then, make sure that you're not getting disrupted and you're trying to see the train a little bit further down the tracks.